Okay, guys, so let's continue to talk about the constraints that we can add in Oracle DDL code. After this part, basically, we have concluded how to create a database structure in the Oracle. So as we discussed in earlier class, primary key is actually the most important one to add in the table creation. And now today we're going to look into how do we define foreign keys, how do we declare a unique attribute, check for the values, which means that we can define the domain of the attribute, and how do we define non-null on the attributes that we want them to be non-null. Of course, among all of these that we want to talk today, probably the most important one is going to be our foreign key. We can define the constraints in table level as well as at the column level. At the column level means that we want to create the constraints during we define the attribute. For the table, that means that after all the attributes are defined, we can define adding more constraints to that. So that for the foreign key, you already know how important it is. It is used to reference another table. More importantly, try to reference another table's primary key. So the foreign key constraint is also known as the referential integrity constraint. It uses a column or columns as a foreign key, and it establishes a relationship with the primary key of the same or another table. So this is going to be the interesting one. Of course, to creating this relationship with the same table, that's talking about a recursive relationship. So in order to do this, there's one thing that you need to understand, and you need to keep that in mind, is that when you try to create a foreign key in a table, the other table that you want to reference have to exist already. This is saying that if you try to reference a table, you really need to create the other table first, so that when you try to create this table, you can reference that table. Or otherwise, if the table is not being created yet and you want to reference that, you will get an error message. So foreign key and foreign reference primary key columns, they don't need to be under the same name, but the domain need to fit with each other, which means that the data type as well as the size of the data type need to be exactly the same. Otherwise, they will have a different domain. The name of the attribute is not necessary to be the same. Of course, if they are the same, it might be easier to understand. So here is how we can define a foreign key. If we want to define a foreign key at the column level, which means that we create the attribute, in this example, faculty ID is the attribute using data type CHAR with 5 space of that. So once these first 2 words are written, we define the attribute. The next thing, if we want to add a foreign key, after that, we need to use the reserved word constraint and then give a name of the constraint. So we use the same fashion of defining the name. Table name, underline attribute name, which is faculty ID over here, underline abbreviation of the foreign key since we want to create a foreign key here. Then the most important word is this one, foreign key, indicating that this is going to be the foreign key constraint with the parenthesis of this attribute. And now the other important reserved word is reference. Remember, there is a S over here. While I was preparing for this slide, I actually, when I'm writing the code, I forgot to put an S over here. The Oracle will not be able to understand if you did not put the S over here. So again, the whole reserved word is references. Provide the other table that you want to reference and the primary key of the table. So you can see that to define a foreign key is actually requires a lot of work, because you need to talk about this is the attribute I want to reference is another table's primary key. So this is an important thing to remember. If you try to define at the table level, and actually you will see for almost every, and I actually encourage you guys to create the foreign keys at the table level, and we will see why pretty soon. To define the foreign keys at the table level, we actually almost doing exactly the same thing at this moment. Still adding a constraint indicating the name of the constraint, write down the foreign key as the reserved word, faculty ID, talk about which attribute that you want to do, reference which table's primary key. So this is going to be the whole sentences to define the foreign key at the table level. So let's talk about why did I say that most of our foreign keys is going to define at the table level. This is the example of our company database. Of course, you see that there are several foreign keys specified in this relational schema diagram. I do see 8 arrows, 4 here, 3 here, 1 here, that indicating we need to have 8 lines of the foreign key definition to fully construct the company database. And then remember I'm saying when you try to reference a table, the other table has to be existed already. Otherwise, you cannot reference it. So take a look of the 2 red lines I have highlighted. You see that when you try to define the employee table, you have everything being defined. And now in the end of it, you want to say that which department that the employee works for. So you have this line over here. That is saying you have to define department table before you define the employee table. So now when you are trying to define the department table here, you're actually realizing that there is actually a foreign key in department table that need to reference the employee's social security number, which is the primary key. So you actually end up with a deadlock here that makes you are not able to basically create foreign keys while defining the table. That's why I'm talking about. Usually when we try to add the foreign key, not only we add that in the table level, but also we add the foreign keys actually after all the tables are being created. Let me show you exactly how I'm going to do that. So while we're trying to define the 2 tables, in this slide you can see that these are the code to creating employee table as well as the department table. You can see that in the employee table, this is actually the practice I want you guys to do on March 17th class assignment. So you can see that these are the codes to creating the employee table. These are the codes to create the department table. When I'm trying to defining the tables, I do not add the foreign keys yet. Instead, after all of the tables are created, I am then going to use something called alter table to add the foreign key into the existing table. So how is this work? What you will need to do is that we use what we call alter table, reserved word indicating now I want to change the table, providing the table name that you want to do the change, and then add constraint to that. So here you can see that what we can do if we want to add the employee table for the constraint of department, DNO referencing department number, what we will need to do is alter table employee, add constraints for the attributes that we want to add, referencing another table's primary key. So you can see that we are creating a table level constraint. To be more clear, you can see that to specify those 2 red lines that I have pointed out, we have an employee table being created, we have department table being created. After all of the tables are created, now we try to do the alter table employee. So I want to change the employee, something inside of the employee. Say add constraint. So I want to add a constraint employee DNOFK, which indicating that this is the name of the constraint for the foreign key DNO, indicating this attribute wants to reference department number's primary key, which is department number's D number here. And it's the same thing over here. And therefore, you will be able to add the foreign key constraints onto the table that you have created. And one more interesting thing I want to show you is this. on top of all the codes that we try to execute. Because Oracle remembers everything. Once you create a table is created. So you basically can see that every time you want to insert the same table that you have created, employee table or student table, you need to drop the table first. So what we usually do over here is that on top of everything, and I start writing drop table employee, indicating I want to drop the table. When you adding the foreign keys, if you still simply say drop table employee, you will get an error message indicating that employee has been referenced. And therefore, another important reserved word that I want to introduce to you guys is the cascade constraints. So by adding these two words over there, indicating that I know there are some foreign keys over there, but I don't care. I just want to drop them. So you can successfully drop whatever you want to drop. Of course, this is a very strong words to use. However, you can see when I'm trying to do this and write these two lines on my code, I can re-execute the codes that I have. So they would drop the table and then create a table and then form the foreign keys over here. So they are actually pretty useful. And this is something I want you guys to work on. I am including this file. So the file I'm talking about is the one that I have created for you guys. So if you take a look of the test.sql that I have developed for you, this code have exactly what I've mentioned over there. Drop the table, create a table, and then alter the table by adding the constraints onto it. So let's take a look of what's happening if I'm going to execute the code. So if we go back to Oracle, I can connect system, indicating I'm going to be the system admin, and then type in the password. Once I see it's connected, I can execute the code. So like this, what I've mentioned earlier, do the add, indicating that's the execution sign that we want to do under the C temp folder, which is the folder I put my file, and my file name is test.sql. Again, if you look into the file, okay, you should be able to see the full name of the file. To make sure of that, if you go to view and then check this sign, file name extensions. So make sure you have click that one, and therefore you can see the full name of your file. Sometimes if you don't do that, you may still end up with .txt, and that file is actually not a good file for you to execute. So once we have done that, I hit enter of the code. It will go to the program and then find it and then trying to run the program. So you can see that the first two lines over here is indicating that I'm going to drop the table. So drop the employee table, drop the department table. That's the first two drop coming from. And then I try to create a table, create another table. That's why I have two lines of the table created over here. And then I will have another two constraints altered. So you can see that the table altered are being specified over there. So right now, what I want you guys to do is have a little bit of practice. Take a look of the employee and department table that we have over here. In here, I believe that there is one more constraint that you can add. One more foreign key that you can add, and then you can try to practice a little bit. So what I want you guys to do is go to the test file over here. Right now, you have two tables created, two foreign keys being created. What I want you guys to do is that I want you to look into one more table. Develop department locations table, form this foreign key goes back to the department. And of course, the supervisor SSN can also create a foreign key to reference the employee. So basically, I want you to create one table and two foreign keys. You do not need to submit this one. This is just something for you guys to practice. Once you are done, please come back. I'm going to continue with the constraints.